Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the crisis in Venezuela. We're talking a contested election, a crushing humanitarian toll, and the really tough choices the U.S. is facing right now. And we're basing all of this on a recent report from the Congressional Research Service.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it down. First up, we'll look at the flashpoint, that 2024 election. Then, we're going to rewind a bit to see how the country slid into authoritarianism and the unbelievable humanitarian crisis that came with it. After that, we'll get into how America's strategy has been changing, and we'll finish up with the critical decisions that are on the table for the U.S. Congress as we speak.
So let's talk about July 2024. Venezuela holds a presidential election, and what was supposed to be, a democratic process, it totally blew up. It turned an already tense situation into this massive international crisis. And that moment really boiled down to one single massive question that has split the world. Who is actually the legitimate president of Venezuela?
This is where things get complicated. You've got two completely different stories. In one corner, you have the official government line. Nicolas Maduro wins. He gets another term. But then you look at the actual data from the polling stations, and we're talking data from over 80% of them, and it shows a totally different result. A massive win for the opposition candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, with something like 67% of the vote.
Yeah, so with a gap that big, you can see why the United States, along with a lot of international observers, basically said, no way. They called the election a fraud, they don't recognize Maduro's presidency, and instead they consider Edmundo Gonzalez to be the country's rightful leader. But look, this election didn't just happen in a vacuum. It wasn't some sudden shock. It was really the final straw after a long, slow-motion slide. A whole decade of democracy just crumbling away into straight-up authoritarianism. If you go back to the era of Hugo Chavez, the country was considered partly free, flawed for sure, but some democratic structures were still there. Then, Nicolas Maduro takes over in 2013, and things really start to change. He consolidates power using the security forces and control over the courts. It got so bad, the International Criminal Court even started investigating for alleged crimes against humanity. That 2024 election and his opponent having to flee the country, that was kind of the nail in the coffin. And we have to remember, this isn't just politics on paper. There is a very real human cost here. As of late 2025, one human rights group reported there were 827 political prisoners being held by the regime. That is a stark number that just shows you how systematically any and all opposition is being crushed. So, as the political situation was falling apart, the economy was completely nosediving right alongside it. We're talking about a catastrophic collapse, which has created this devastating humanitarian crisis that has touched literally every single Venezuelan. It's honestly hard to even wrap your head around how bad this economic collapse was. From 2013 to 2020, Venezuela's entire economy, its GDP, shrank by an astounding 80%. 80? A huge part of that was its vital oil industry just imploding, and a U.S. government report acknowledged that American sanctions made that decline even worse. So what does an 80% economic collapse actually feel like for the average person? Well, it looks like this. By 2024, nearly 3 out of every 4 people in Venezuela were living in poverty. That means a daily struggle for food, for clean water, for electricity. And the result of this brutal 1-2 punch of political repression and economic freefall? A mass exodus. We're talking about nearly 8 million people who have been forced to flee their homes, creating one of the largest displacement crises on the entire planet. So with all of that going on, how has the United States responded? Well, the answer really depends on who was in the White House. Each of the last 3 administrations has taken a pretty different approach. The first Trump administration went with what it called a maximum pressure strategy. The idea was to use sweeping economic sanctions to try and choke the regime and force Maduro out. The Biden administration then switched tactics. It offered some sanctions relief as a kind of carrot, trying to incentivize Maduro to allow a fair election in 2024. Well, as we already saw with the results of the 2024 election, that incentive strategy didn't work. And in response, the current Trump administration has signaled a significant hardening of its stance. And this tougher policy isn't just talk either. We're seeing a clear escalation in U.S. actions, designating the powerful Tren de Aragua gang a terrorist organization, doubling the reward for Maduro's capture to $50 million, deploying a significant naval presence to the region, and even conducting lethal military strikes on suspected drug boats. So you have this perfect storm: a stolen election, a humanitarian disaster, and a more aggressive U.S. posture. And it all lands squarely on the desk of the U.S. Congress. They're now facing a series of critical decisions about what to do next. And Congress holds some powerful levers here. They can shape sanctions policy, they can authorize or restrict the use of military force, and they control the funding for both humanitarian aid and democracy programs. They also have a key oversight role and are even considering creative ideas, like using assets seized from corrupt officials to create a fund to support a democratic future for Venezuela. So here's the takeaway. There are no easy answers here. The situation in Venezuela is at a critical juncture, and the debate in Washington is just intensifying. As the Venezuelan people face a deeply uncertain future, the fundamental question for the United States remains: what's the right mix of pressure, diplomacy, and force to actually help shape a better outcome?